Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, EmeraldPlanet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the EmeraldPlanet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the EmeraldPlanet as we come to you from the United States and Washington, D.C. as we look around the globe in 143 different nations looking at the best possible practices to address severe climate change, alternative energy production, and many of the other issues facing us in the 21st century. There is quite a debate going on among some scientists and other researchers of the whole notion of sea level rise. What is actually happening to the oceans and what's going on in the areas of freshwater, the degradation of the glaciers, and many other issues surrounding water and the seas. But we have an expert with us that's been living in the South Pacific now for some 10 years, working on research projects and developing very practical techniques and technologies that can be used to address not only the nations of the South Pacific and the SIDS, which we'll describe for you in just a minute, but also it can be used by developed nations around the globe. So we have with us Erik Hagberg, who is the CEO and founder of PAC, which is the Pacific Aquaculture Cooperatives International. And Erik, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Hancock.
Glad to have you here. And let's go with the very first slide to bring up, because we're going to be talking, and this is going to be a fast-paced, our dear viewers, as we look at these various island nations and some of the notions that we're talking about. And looking at PAC International, quickly tell us a little bit of the history of PAC International, and let's get right into SIDS, what that means, and then some of the notions that we're going to be talking about.
PAC International is an international business corporation strategically designed to revolutionize large-scale aquaculture and agriculture in SIDS, or Small Island Developing States.
And what we're talking about there is the whole notion of sustainable development. And you know, it's really interesting. People use this whole notion of sustainability, many definitions. Actually, not a lot of people seem to really know what it truly means. We were talking about this earlier. What does sustainability, sustainable development mean to you in relationship to why we're in the South Pacific and looking at these island nations, and what is the impact for long-term development around the globe?
Well, in the context of food production, especially regarding aquaculture, which is sea farming, sustainability means being able to yield a harvest year after year after year. And we're targeting sea cucumbers, which are one of the most valuable and one of the most beneficial creatures in the sea, and thus they're also one of the most highly exploited. So I've spent the past 10 years developing technologies to
let's go back to this, and we're looking at you know, one of these satellite views here. How does this relate to, you know, this 10 years of research and development? I mean, you've been out there literally in the very beginning, almost on your own, looking at this, working with governments and the Marshalls, the Solomons, now Micronesia. I mean, that really is a pioneering effort.
Years ago, I hypothesized that the coral atolls of the Central Pacific were one of the last remaining assets that had the potential, due to its size, scope, and pristine nature, to provide for the growing food demand of communities around the world, of the global community.
Now, looking at this, we're saying that using the word atoll, we're looking at areas here which are actually islands, and then of course we have the coral reefs. When you're saying atoll, how would you define that for our viewing public here and abroad?
A coral atoll is an extinct volcano. The process was actually discovered by Charles Darwin in the Galapagos, and a high island like Hawaii over millennia migrates away from the volcanic hotspot and begins to sink under its own weight. When the caldera is at the surface, sea surface, coral reefs begin to develop upon it, and as you can see, it results in a very unique geological formation, which is a ring of low-lying islands with an enclosed lagoon in the middle. Oftentimes there'll be channels, other atolls will have no channels. But really, we consider a coral atoll to be an enormously large farm that can be utilized for sea ranching.
I tell you, this thing is fantastic. As you're out in the South Pacific, and many people saying, many of these islands have little to no natural resources, and actually what we're finding out is not true at all.
Right. Research is
and let's
correct.
move forward. We've got a much more complex and integrated view of what's going on here. Tell us a little bit about this. We're moving away from a single atoll.
That's correct.
Now we're going to, in essence, a nation state, looking at that. Now, what is the integration of this, and how does that relate, again, to this whole notion of sustainable development?
Well, the satellite image here is depicting one province in the Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands is composed of low-lying atolls, but it's also composed of high islands. And the high islands are surrounded by lagoons and reefs, which are also wonderfully productive and can be utilized for large-scale aquaculture.
So I think really one of the first things that we need to talk about as far as your 10 years worth of research and development is that you actually perceived of this as being a natural resource that's available not only for these island states, which are very small and kind of insignificant if you think about it as far as all the nations, United Nations, but yet their importance is rising almost on a year-to-year basis as we have sea level rise, and they're really the vanguard of what's going to happen as far as even things in the United States or Japan, any island country that's surrounded, because sea level rise, they're saying, could be as much as 3 to 30 feet, depending on who you believe.
That's correct on a number of different levels. Some liken low-lying island states and atolls like you'll see here, which are just a tiny, tiny land area, less than a square mile. These can be considered canaries in the coal mine, and the effects of developed nations and their resource utilization and unchecked pollution is really affecting these island communities who are the least responsible, in fact not at all responsible for the problem, but they're the first to see the real and dire effects of global climate change.
And they're getting the direct impact, and it's really interesting if you look at Washington, D.C. in the United States, or you look at Tokyo in Japan, some of these other island nations, if you will, is that 3 feet, Washington, D.C. is at 3 feet. And so when you look at these areas here, what is being done, the techniques, the technologies you're developing for these island states then is something that is going to be, has profound impact.
That's correct.
Over the next, actually, to the end of the 21st into the 22nd century.
Well, what our team realized along the way is that sea cucumber, while ubiquitous in the world's oceans and providing absolute potential in each of the small island developing states, in and of itself is not alone. Food production will be yielded from the sea cucumber farming. Jobs will be created, but we need to have a multifaceted approach that's going to result in 100% employment on these remote islands.
You must do that because, again, now on many of these islands it's 50% or better unemployment. There's a few underemployment. But looking at this atoll right here, what are we looking at? We see the islands with the green trees and the landscape there, and then you have, of course, the coral reefs in between. But what's happening is that some 50 to 85%, depending again who's doing the assessment in the country, of these are actually bleached.
That's correct.
So these are actually dead. Many of these are actually dead.
Coral atoll communities are facing a number of problems. One is sea level rise. Over the past 10 years, I've witnessed it with my own eyes. High tides are now lapping over shores that have never experienced that before. We're also facing massive coral bleaching from global climate change, high sea surface temperatures. Coral reefs are the natural barrier and natural line of defense, not only to form an island, but to protect it from natural elements. As the corals are dying, the islands are very rapidly losing their resilience to grow and be protected.
Looking at this one right here, this is a much larger area, and I believe, didn't you say this was in French Polynesia?
This is Rangiroa Atoll. The former slide was also the famous Blue Lagoon located on the eastern end of Rangiroa. This is an area where we're working with native Tahitians, the landowners of this area. We have the commitment of the local government to go ahead with the project, and here's 21 million square meters of farm area. Now, if that was likened to a cattle farm, this would be one of the largest freestanding cattle farms anywhere. In fact, on the aquaculture standpoint, this would be the largest standalone sea cucumber farm in the world.
Now, the whole thing about this, the interesting thing about this is that actually this is all natural, so you're not having to use fertilizers,
Right.
no insecticides, pesticides, and actually the sea cucumber as a bottom feeder is actually cleaning
That's correct.
all of this
Right.
that's coming in actually from the ocean, so the water that may actually exit this is actually cleaner than what is actually coming into the lagoon itself.
That's true. That's true. Sea cucumber is a really unique opportunity because A, it's scalable, B, there are existing resources that can be rapidly shifted into a sustainable culture system using the pack methods that we've developed over the past 10 years.
And also looking at this right now, we want to put this in here because we're going to be winding out of time here shortly, is this whole notion of the BioRock, or this patented process as far as reestablishing
Right.
these coral reefs. And this area, as we talked about earlier, 2 years earlier, one is that you didn't have all this growth as far as the coral reef itself, but also there are no fish.
That's right.
And so tell us a little bit about this picture for the viewing public and the long-term impact of what it is that we're looking at.
Well, this is a technology called BioRock technology. And what it is, it's an electrochemical accretion process. In layman's terms, we can grow limestone out of seawater.
And it's just absolutely amazing. And of course, this whole thing is bringing the fish back into this area to give them protection from sharks and other predators and all that. But the whole notion is, people are saying, well, what in the world is a sea cucumber? It doesn't look like what's in my garden. So looking at these, you're asking me to eat this, but I know it's in all my Asian prepared food, so it's got to be good for you.
Well, it's actually quite more than that. In fact, from the time that we started until today, it's now recently been included in patented treatments for HIV. It is showing extraordinary promise in cancer treatments. Malaria, there's been some breakthroughs with malaria research using sea cucumber components, and there's a 5,000-year history behind the sea cucumber of being a health tonic. And all of these things are leading in the right direction. Now it's just a matter of farming it on the scale required to make it available to the general public.
The reason we're going to end up with this particular slide, this is a senator from Micronesia that I had a chance to meet at the World Bank. And tell us a little bit about the food box. We only have about 20 seconds left. So food box, food production, long-term impact.
The first threat of sea level rise is the destruction of food crops. The Earth box is technically and strategically designed to bring food security back to these islands. It needs to be done.
And this also is something that can be done because, again, it's a whole notion of using what available water, how much or how little that you have, also to remove insecticides, pesticides, and all these other things within that. Thank you for being with us. We have much more to go as far as looking at sea level rise as we look around the globe as we create the Emerald Planet.